The evening sun cast long shadows across the nearly empty gas station as Rachel pulled her SUV up to the pump. At 7 months pregnant, even simple tasks like getting gas had become an adventure, but she was determined to maintain her independence while her husband was away on a business trip. Little did she know that this routine stop would turn into one of the most intense moments of her life. As she struggled with the heavy gas pump, the rumble of motorcycles filled the air. 3 bikes pulled into the station, their engines unnecessarily loud in the quiet evening. Rachel tried to focus on her task, but she couldn't help noticing how the riders were watching her, their faces partially hidden behind their helmets and bandanas. The tallest of the 3 dismounted his bike and started walking toward her. "Hey there, pretty lady. Looks like you could use some help with that," he called out, his voice carrying a tone that made Rachel's skin crawl. She politely declined, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Come on now, don't be like that," another biker chimed in, moving closer. "We're just trying to be gentlemen." The third rider laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the empty lot. Rachel's hand instinctively moved to protect her pregnant belly as she took a step back toward her car. The station attendant, an elderly man who had been watching through the window, came outside. "Everything all right out here?" he called, but his presence seemed to barely register with the bikers. The first rider waved him off dismissively. "Mind your own business, old-timer. We're just having a friendly chat with the lady." The other 2 bikers had now formed a loose circle around Rachel, cutting off her path to the store. Her phone was in her purse on the passenger seat, just a few feet away but seemingly unreachable. What the bikers didn't know was that Rachel wasn't as alone as she appeared. Her husband, David, a former Navy SEAL with 15 years of service, was actually on his way to meet her. They had planned to have dinner together after she finished running errands, and he was less than 5 minutes away. Rachel's thoughts raced as she remembered the self-defense techniques David had taught her. "Stay calm," he always said. "Keep your wits about you. Create distance when possible." She began to edge backward, trying to keep all 3 men in her line of sight while reaching for her car door. "Look, I appreciate the offer to help, but I'm finishing up here," she said firmly, proud that her voice didn't betray her fear. "My husband is meeting me any minute now." This information seemed to amuse the bikers rather than deter them. "Husband, huh?" the tall one sneered. "Well, he should know better than to leave such a precious cargo all alone." His hand reached out toward her arm, and Rachel prepared to defend herself, but before contact was made, the distinctive sound of squealing tires cut through the evening air. A black pickup truck came to an abrupt stop at the station entrance. The driver's door flew open, and out stepped David, his military training evident in every controlled movement. His face was calm, but his eyes took in every detail of the scene before him. The atmosphere at the gas station shifted instantly. Where moments ago the bikers had been full of misplaced confidence, now there was tension in their postures. David's presence commanded attention, not through aggression or threats, but through the quiet authority that came from years of handling dangerous situations. "Rachel, are you okay?" David called out, his voice steady and reassuring. He walked toward the group with measured steps, his hands visible and relaxed at his sides. The lead biker started to say something, but David's unwavering gaze made him reconsider. "We were just offering the lady some help," one of the other bikers muttered, already backing toward his motorcycle. The third rider had already mounted his bike, clearly reading the situation and deciding it was time to leave. David positioned himself between Rachel and the bikers, still maintaining that same calm demeanor that somehow seemed more intimidating than any show of aggression. "She's all set, gentlemen. Time for you to move along." It wasn't a request, and everyone present knew it. The lead biker held David's gaze for a moment longer, then shrugged with forced casualness. "Whatever, man. We were just leaving anyway." He and his remaining companion retreated to their bikes, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. As the bikers roared away, Rachel let out a shaky breath and leaned against David. He wrapped an arm around her, his hand gently resting on her belly. The elderly attendant approached them, offering to call the police, but Rachel declined. She was safe now, and that's what mattered. Later that evening, over dinner at their favorite restaurant, Rachel and David talked about what happened. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I remembered everything you taught me about staying calm and aware." David smiled proudly, but there was concern in his eyes. "You did everything right," he assured her. "But maybe we should look into installing that security system we've been talking about. Especially with the baby coming." Rachel nodded, knowing that while she had handled herself well, it was better to be prepared than lucky. The incident at the gas station became a turning point for them. They took additional safety precautions, and David started teaching self-defense classes for expectant mothers at the local community center. What could have been a traumatic experience instead became a catalyst for positive change in their community. Word of the incident at the gas station spread quickly through their small community. The elderly attendant, despite Rachel's attempt to keep things quiet, had shared the story with his regular customers. Soon, David's self-defense classes at the community center were filled to capacity, with not just expectant mothers, but women of all ages eager to learn. One rainy Tuesday evening, as David was wrapping up a class, a young woman approached him. Her eyes were red from crying, and she nervously twisted a tissue in her hands. "I saw those same bikers," she whispered, glancing around as if they might materialize in the community center. "They've been hanging around my workplace, watching people come and go." David's protective instincts kicked in immediately. After 15 years as a SEAL, he'd developed a sixth sense for trouble, and this had all the markings of an ongoing problem. He invited the woman, who introduced herself as Amy, to join him and Rachel for coffee at the diner across the street. Over steaming cups of coffee, Amy shared her story. She worked as a night shift nurse at the local medical center, and for the past week, she'd noticed the bikers lingering in the parking lot during shift changes. Several of her co-workers had reported feeling uncomfortable, but security dismissed their concerns since the bikers hadn't technically done anything wrong. Rachel, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, listened intently, her hand absently rubbing her swollen belly. The similarities to her own experience were striking, but this situation seemed more calculated, more deliberate. "Have you reported this to the police?" she asked gently. Amy nodded, wiping away fresh tears. "They said they'll increase patrols, but without any actual incidents, there's not much they can do." She looked at David hopefully. "I thought maybe, since you helped your wife, you might have some advice?" David sat back, his coffee untouched, his mind already formulating a plan. His SEAL training had taught him that prevention was always better than confrontation. "First things first," he said, pulling out a notebook. "We need to document everything. Times, dates, descriptions. The more detailed, the better." As Amy described the bikers' patterns, David noticed they were more organized than the random encounter at the gas station suggested. They appeared during specific shift changes, particularly when the parking lot was busiest and most chaotic. This wasn't opportunistic harassment, this was surveillance. Rachel watched her husband's expression change subtly as he pieced things together. She recognized that look from their early dating days when he was still active duty. It was the same expression he wore when solving complex tactical problems. "Amy, how many employees typically leave during these shift changes?" David asked, his pen poised over the notebook. The answer confirmed his suspicions. The chaos of shift changes provided perfect cover for whatever the bikers were planning. Over the next hour, they developed a safety plan. David would coordinate with some of his former military buddies who now worked in private security. They would volunteer to escort hospital staff to their cars during shift changes. Rachel would help organize a buddy system among the employees, ensuring no one walked to their vehicle alone. But David knew these were just band-aids. The real solution required addressing the root of the problem. He made a few calls to old contacts in law enforcement, sharing his observations and suspicions. The patterns he'd documented suggested something bigger than simple harassment. As they were leaving the diner, Amy hugged Rachel impulsively. "Thank you both so much," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "I was so scared to speak up, but after hearing about what happened to you, Rachel, I knew I had to do something." Walking home, Rachel slipped her hand into David's. "You're worried this is something bigger, aren't you?" she asked, reading his thoughtful expression. He nodded slowly, his military training making him cautious about jumping to conclusions but also telling him to trust his instincts. "Those bikers at the gas station might have been random troublemakers," he said carefully, "but these guys at the hospital, their behavior is too organized. Too purposeful." He helped Rachel navigate around a puddle, ever protective of his pregnant wife. That night, as they lay in bed, Rachel couldn't sleep. The baby was especially active, as if sensing her mother's concern. She watched David checking their home security system one more time, making sure all the cameras were working properly. The incident at the gas station had changed them both, not making them fearful, but more aware, more prepared. David finally climbed into bed, pulling Rachel close. "Remember what we always say about fear?" he asked softly, his hand resting protectively over their unborn child. Rachel smiled in the darkness, recalling one of the first lessons he'd taught in his self-defense class. "Fear is natural," she recited, "but preparation beats panic every time." She felt him nod against her hair. "Do you think Amy will be okay?" she asked after a moment. "She's taken the first step by speaking up," David replied. "And now she's not alone. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the whole situation, knowing you have support." He felt Rachel relax slightly at his words. But as his wife drifted off to sleep, David's mind was still working. Tomorrow, he would make more calls, pull more strings. Something wasn't right about those bikers at the hospital, and his years of military service had taught him to trust his gut. Whatever was going on, he was determined to get to the bottom of it, not just for Amy's sake, but for the safety of the entire community. The next morning, David's first call was to his old friend Robert, now a detective with the local police department. Over breakfast, he shared his concerns about the bikers at the hospital while Rachel listened intently, adding details from Amy's account. "The timing's interesting," Robert said after hearing everything. "We've had reports of prescription medication disappearing from several hospitals in neighboring counties. Nothing concrete enough for a full investigation, but the pattern's there." He paused, and David could hear him shuffling papers. "And in each case, there were reports of suspicious bikers in the area before the incidents." Rachel, who had been quietly sipping her tea, spoke up. "So the harassment isn't random, it's reconnaissance?" Her voice was steady, but David could see the concern in her eyes. Their encounter at the gas station now seemed like a warning sign they'd almost missed. David spent the morning coordinating with his security contacts. By afternoon, a rotating schedule of volunteers was in place at the hospital. Most were veterans like himself, men and women who understood the importance of being alert without being obvious. They blended in seamlessly with the hospital staff, watching and waiting. Meanwhile, Rachel had her regular prenatal checkup at the same medical center. As she walked through the parking lot with David, she noticed small changes. Security cameras that had been broken for months were now repaired, lighting fixtures had been upgraded, and hospital staff moved in pairs or groups. Inside, the atmosphere was different too. The nurses seemed more relaxed, knowing they had support. Amy greeted them with a warm smile, looking more confident than she had at the diner. "Your husband's friends are amazing," she told Rachel during the checkup. "Just having them around has made everyone feel safer." But as Rachel was leaving, she overheard two nurses discussing a missing shipment of medications. Her maternal instincts, already heightened by pregnancy, sent a warning signal through her body. She shared the information with David as they walked to their car. That evening, David received a call from one of his security volunteers. The bikers had returned, but their behavior had changed. Instead of watching the staff, they were studying the building itself, paying particular attention to the service entrances and delivery bays. Their leader had been seen taking photos with a phone. "They're planning something soon," David told Rachel as they prepared dinner. "The missing medications, the surveillance, it all fits." He chopped vegetables with military precision, his mind working through scenarios. "Robert thinks they might be part of a larger operation targeting hospitals across the state." Rachel set down the plate she was holding, remembering their encounter at the gas station. "Do you think they recognized you that day? Is that why they left so quickly?" The thought that they might have unknowingly interrupted a criminal operation made her shudder. David pulled her close, feeling their baby kick between them. "It's possible. But that's not what matters now. What matters is stopping them before anyone gets hurt." He kissed her forehead gently. "And keeping you and our little one safe." Later that night, as they lay in bed, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected. What if the gas station wasn't random, she mused aloud. It's on the main route to the hospital. What if they were using it as a staging area? David sat up, suddenly alert. Rachel's insight triggered something in his tactical mind. The gas station's location, the timing of the bikers' appearances at the hospital, the pattern of missing medications, it all pointed to a carefully planned operation. He immediately called Robert, sharing Rachel's theory. The detective agreed it made sense. "We've been watching the hospital, but maybe we should be watching the gas station too," Robert said. "If they're using it as a staging area, we might catch them preparing rather than executing their plan." The next day, David noticed subtle changes in the bikers' routine. They arrived earlier, stayed longer, and their formation when riding suggested military or law enforcement training. These weren't just random thugs, they were organized, disciplined, and dangerous. Rachel, despite being in her final weeks of pregnancy, insisted on staying involved. She helped Amy organize a staff meeting where employees could share information about suspicious activities. Pattern emerged: deliveries that arrived at odd hours, security cameras that mysteriously malfunctioned, doors found unlocked when they should have been secured. "They're testing the system," David explained when Rachel shared the information. "Looking for weaknesses, establishing routines. It's exactly what I would do if I were planning a tactical operation." His voice carried the weight of experience, remembering similar missions from his SEAL days, though then, he had been on the right side of the law. As they discussed the situation over dinner, Rachel suddenly grabbed David's arm. "The baby," she whispered, her face a mix of surprise and concern. I think it's time." The contractions had started, earlier than expected but strong and regular. David remained calm, helping Rachel to her feet. But as they prepared to leave for the hospital, his phone buzzed with a message from one of his security volunteers. The bikers had been spotted at the gas station, more of them than ever before, and they were gearing up for something big. Rachel saw the conflict in her husband's eyes and squeezed his hand. "Go," she said firmly. "Amy's on duty tonight. She'll take care of me. You need to stop whatever they're planning." She smiled through another contraction. "Just try to wrap it up before our baby arrives." David hesitated, torn between his duty to protect the community and his desire to be with his wife. Rachel's next words sealed his decision: "You always say that preparation beats panic. Well, you've prepared me for this moment. Now go make sure our baby is born into a safer world." With a quick kiss and a promise to return as soon as possible, David helped Rachel into the car. As he drove toward the hospital, his mind raced between concern for his wife and the imminent threat. Whatever the bikers were planning, they had chosen the wrong night to make their move. Tonight, David wasn't just a former SEAL protecting his community, he was a father protecting the world his child would be born into. The hospital parking lot was unusually quiet as David helped Rachel from the car. Amy was already waiting at the entrance with a wheelchair, her face showing both professional concern and personal warmth. "Don't worry about anything except bringing this baby into the world," she assured Rachel, shooting a meaningful look at David. "We've got everything under control." David knelt beside the wheelchair, taking Rachel's hand. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised, his voice tight with emotion. Rachel squeezed his hand, managing a smile despite another contraction. "Just be safe," she whispered. "Both of us will be waiting for you." As Amy wheeled Rachel inside, David's phone buzzed with updates from his security team. The bikers had split into 3 groups, each positioning themselves at strategic points around the hospital. Their leader, the same tall man from the gas station, was coordinating their movements with military precision. David quickly called Robert, who was already en route with a tactical team. "They're using our hospital security measures against us," David explained, watching a group of bikers through his rearview mirror. "They know our patrol patterns now, know where the cameras are. They're waiting for shift change when everything's chaos." "How long until shift change?" Robert asked, though they both knew the answer. 30 minutes, David replied, his jaw tight. The same time window when Rachel would likely be in the most intense part of her labor. The bikers had unknowingly picked the worst possible night to make their move. At the gas station, David met with 4 of his former military colleagues who'd been helping with hospital security. They quickly established a plan, using hand signals and hushed voices. Years of training kicked in as they moved into position, becoming shadows in the growing dusk. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Rachel's labor was progressing rapidly. Amy stayed with her, providing both medical care and emotional support. "Your husband's quite something," she said, checking Rachel's vitals. "The whole hospital feels safer because of what you two started." Rachel gripped the bed rails through another contraction, thinking of David out there in the darkness. "He's always been a protector," she managed to say. "It's just who he is." Amy nodded, understanding. "Tonight, we protect you while he protects everyone else." Back at the gas station, David and his team watched as 3 more motorcycles arrived. The bikers were loading their saddlebags with what looked like tools and empty duffel bags. Through his night vision scope, David could see wire cutters, electronic devices, and what appeared to be copied key cards. "They're not just after medications," he whispered into his radio to Robert. "This is a professional crew. They've got hardware that could compromise the hospital's entire security system." The implications were clear: this was bigger than just one hospital. If they succeeded, they'd have access to medical supplies and secure areas across the entire healthcare network. Robert's voice crackled back, "Tactical team is 4 minutes out. Can you stall them?" David watched as the bikers prepared to move out. "We'll find a way," he replied, already signaling to his team to get ready. Inside the hospital, Rachel's doctor had arrived to check her progress. "You're doing great," she encouraged. "The baby's in perfect position." Rachel nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, where she could see motorcycles gathering in the distance. Amy noticed her concern and drew the curtains. "Focus on your breathing," she advised, then quietly spoke into her radio, updating security about movement in the parking lot. The hospital staff had become a seamless part of the security network, alert but calm, maintaining normal operations while staying vigilant. At the gas station, David's team had disabled 2 motorcycles by quietly letting air out of their tires while the riders were inside paying for gas. It wasn't much, but it would split the group, divide their attention. The elderly attendant who had witnessed the original confrontation weeks ago gave David a knowing nod through the window. The bikers discovered the flat tires just as they were preparing to leave. Their leader's face contorted with anger, visible even in the dim light. "We don't have time for this," he growled, ordering the affected riders to hot-wire cars from the nearby parking lot instead. That was all David needed to hear. He radioed Robert, "They're about to add Grand Theft Auto to their list. We've got probable cause." Seconds later, police cruisers appeared, blocking all exits from the gas station. The tactical team arrived simultaneously, their vehicles dark and silent. The bikers realized they were trapped. Some raised their hands immediately, recognizing the professionalism of the operation. Others tried to scatter, only to find every escape route blocked by David's team of veterans, all of whom had positioned themselves perfectly in the darkness. Their leader, however, made a break for the hospital on his motorcycle, weaving through the blockade with remarkable skill. David was already moving, anticipating this reaction. He swung onto his own motorcycle, borrowed from one of his security volunteers, and gave chase. The pursuit was tense but brief. David's SEAL training included advanced motorcycle handling, and he knew these streets intimately. He stayed with the biker leader, keeping him away from the hospital while police units moved to intercept. Finally, the leader made a crucial mistake, taking a turn too fast in his desperation to escape. His motorcycle slid out from under him, sending him rolling across the pavement. David was off his bike in seconds, securing the man before he could recover. As he zip-tied the biker's hands, David recognized him from military photos Robert had shared earlier, a former Army Ranger turned mercenary, wanted in connection with a string of sophisticated hospital robberies across 3 states. The man spat in frustration, "You have no idea what you've messed up here." "Actually, I do," David replied calmly, hearing police sirens approaching. "And so do the FBI agents who are currently raiding your storage facilities." The man's eyes widened, his entire operation was crumbling around him. Robert arrived moments later, immediately reading the biker his rights. "We found their staging area," he told David. "They've been stealing controlled substances and selling them through a sophisticated distribution network. Your gas station encounter probably saved more lives than you know." David's phone buzzed, a message from Amy. His heart stopped for a moment as he read it, then a smile broke across his face. "Speaking of saving lives," he said to Robert, already heading for his motorcycle, "I need to get to the hospital. My baby's coming." David barely registered parking his motorcycle as he rushed through the hospital entrance. The same halls he'd been analyzing for security vulnerabilities just hours ago now seemed endless as he made his way to the maternity ward. His heart pounded, not from the chase or confrontation, but from the thought of missing his child's birth. The maternity ward was peaceful, a stark contrast to the events that had just unfolded outside. Amy met him at the entrance, her face glowing with excitement. "Perfect timing," she said, helping him into surgical scrubs. "Rachel's been incredible. She kept saying you'd make it back in time." When David entered the delivery room, Rachel's face lit up despite her exhaustion. "Did you get them?" she managed to ask between controlled breaths. David took her hand, kissing her forehead. "Got them all. Now it's your turn to be the hero." The next hour was a blur of emotions and intensity, but this time the adrenaline wasn't from combat or chase, it was from the miracle of bringing new life into the world. At 3:47 a.m., their daughter made her entrance, announcing her arrival with a powerful cry that made both parents laugh through their tears. As David cut the umbilical cord with trembling hands, he couldn't help but marvel at how this tiny being had inadvertently helped uncover and shut down a major criminal operation. If Rachel hadn't stopped for gas that evening, if she hadn't been so brave and clear-headed, if they hadn't listened to Amy's concerns, the whole string of events might never have unfolded. While Rachel and their newborn daughter rested, David stepped into the hallway to find Robert waiting with coffee and news. "Final count is 17 arrests," he reported quietly. The leader was running a sophisticated operation targeting hospitals across 3 states. They'd steal controlled substances during shift changes, using inside intelligence about hospital security systems. The gas station was their staging area, David asked, though he already knew the answer. Robert nodded. They'd use it to sort and distribute the stolen medications. Your encounter with them that day disrupted their routine. When they realized you were ex-military, they started rushing their timeline. Made mistakes. The elderly gas station attendant had been crucial to the investigation, providing security footage and noting down license plate numbers. He'd recognized something wasn't right about the bikers long before the confrontation with Rachel, but hadn't had enough evidence to act on his suspicions. As morning light began filtering through the hospital windows, more visitors arrived. The security volunteers who'd helped protect the hospital stopped by with gifts and congratulations. Amy brought in a handmade blanket during her break, telling them how the entire night shift had pitched in to make it. The staff took up a collection, she explained, handling the precious bundle with practiced care. We wanted to do something special for the family that helped make our workplace safe again. Rachel wiped away tears as she ran her fingers over the soft fabric, touched by the gesture. David watched his wife and daughter, remembering the fear he'd felt when he first received Amy's report about the bikers at the hospital. That fear had turned into determination, then action, and now it had transformed into something beautiful. The community had come together, proving that courage was contagious. Throughout the morning, David received updates about the investigation. The FBI had uncovered connections to similar operations in other states. The stolen medications had been making their way into a complex distribution network, endangering countless lives. By stopping this one crew, they'd helped dismantle a major pipeline of illegal pharmaceuticals. Rachel dozed while David held their daughter, marveling at her tiny features. You know, he whispered to the sleeping infant, your mom is the real hero of this story. She stayed calm when most people would have panicked. She trusted her instincts when something felt wrong. And she gave me the strength to do what needed to be done. The elderly gas station attendant stopped by during his lunch break, bringing a small stuffed motorcycle that made everyone laugh. Never thought my little security camera would help catch a criminal gang, he chuckled. Just goes to show, sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. Amy joined them during her break, sharing how the hospital administration was implementing new security measures based on what they'd learned. We're not just treating symptoms anymore, she said proudly. We're preventing problems before they start. And it all began because you two weren't afraid to stand up and take action. Later that afternoon, as Rachel prepared to feed their daughter, she reflected on everything that had happened. It's amazing how one moment can change so much, she mused. That night at the gas station. I was so scared. But now look at everything good that came from it. David pulled his chair closer to the bed, watching his two favorite people in the world. That's often how it works, he said softly. Real courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared. You taught me that. Outside the hospital room, life went on. The shift change happened smoothly, with new security protocols in place. The parking lot was full of normal activity, no suspicious bikes in sight. Inside, a family celebrated new beginnings, stronger for having faced adversity together. As evening approached, Robert stopped by one last time with final paperwork. The FBI wants to commend both of you, he said. This case will probably be studied for years. How one chance encounter led to bringing down an entire criminal network. Rachel smiled tiredly, we just did what anyone would do. David squeezed her hand, knowing that wasn't true. They had done what people of courage do, stood up, spoke out, and took action, even when it would have been easier to look the other way. Their daughter slept peacefully, unaware that her world was already safer because of her parents' actions. The handmade blanket from the hospital staff wrapped her in the love of a grateful community. Outside, the sun set on a day that had begun in darkness but ended in light, hope, and new beginnings. 3 months after their daughter's dramatic arrival, Rachel and David sat in their living room, watching the evening news. The story of the hospital drug ring had finally broken nationally, following the FBI's successful operation to dismantle the entire network. Their small town's role in cracking the case was being celebrated, though Rachel and David had asked to remain anonymous. Local authorities credit community vigilance and cooperation between civilian security experts and law enforcement for the breakthrough that led to over 200 arrests nationwide, the news anchor reported. The camera panned across their familiar hospital, now implementing new security protocols that were being adopted by medical centers across the country. David cradled their sleeping daughter while Rachel folded tiny laundry, both of them still amazed at how one frightening encounter at a gas station had sparked such far-reaching changes. The self-defense classes at the community center had expanded into a comprehensive safety awareness program, with David and his veteran friends volunteering their time to teach. "Remember what Amy told us yesterday?" Rachel asked, setting aside a stack of onesies. "3 other hospitals in the state have adopted our buddy system for staff. Sometimes the simplest solutions make the biggest difference." She smiled, watching their daughter's peaceful face. "Just like someone else we know who's changing the world just by being herself." The baby had become something of a mascot at the hospital, where Rachel now led support groups for expectant mothers dealing with anxiety and fear. Her own experience had shown her how important it was to feel empowered during pregnancy, and the groups had become a safe space for women to share their concerns and learn practical safety strategies. Amy had been promoted to head nurse for her role in helping expose the drug theft operation. She stopped by regularly, both as a friend and to update them on the positive changes at the hospital. Security was no longer seen as just a department but as everyone's responsibility, creating a culture of awareness and mutual support. The elderly gas station attendant, whose careful observation and detailed notes had provided crucial evidence for the investigation, had become a local hero in his own right. His station was now a model for community security awareness, with other businesses seeking his advice on how to spot and report suspicious activity. "You know what still amazes me?" David said, gently rocking their daughter as she stirred. "How many people were already noticing something was wrong, but didn't feel empowered to speak up. All they needed was someone to take their concerns seriously." Rachel nodded, thinking about the support group she'd led that morning. "That's what I tell the women in my group. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And there's always someone willing to help if you're brave enough to ask." Their home had become a gathering place for the informal network of veterans and healthcare workers who'd come together during the crisis. Weekly meetings that had once focused on security now included baby cuddles and potluck dinners, building bonds that strengthened the entire community. The FBI investigation had revealed just how sophisticated the drug theft operation had been. Hospitals across multiple states had been targeted, with the thieves exploiting shift changes and staff shortages to steal millions of dollars worth of medications. The gang had specifically chosen hospitals in smaller communities, counting on a lack of coordination between local law enforcement agencies. "Sometimes I wonder," Rachel mused, "what would have happened if we hadn't stopped at that gas station that night? If we'd taken a different route home?" She reached out to stroke their daughter's tiny hand, marveling at how life's biggest changes often hinged on seemingly small decisions. David considered this, remembering the intensity of that night. "Someone else would have eventually caught them," he said finally. "But how many more hospitals would have been hit? How many more lives would have been affected by those stolen medications reaching the streets?" The impact of the case continued to ripple outward. Robert, their friend from the police department, had been recruited to help develop a national training program for hospital security. The program emphasized the importance of community engagement and the value of listening to staff concerns, no matter how small they might seem. Their daughter stirred and woke, demanding attention with a tiny but insistent cry. As Rachel prepared to feed her, David watched them both with profound gratitude. The night that could have been a tragedy had instead become a catalyst for positive change, not just for their family but for countless others. The community had learned valuable lessons about the power of speaking up, standing together, and taking action. The hospital staff walked with new confidence, knowing they had a voice and the support to use it. Local businesses had formed a network to share security information and resources, creating a safer environment for everyone. "You were right, David said, helping Rachel settle into the nursing chair. "About what you said that night in the hospital. One moment really can change everything." He watched as their daughter nursed contentedly, her tiny hand wrapped around Rachel's finger. "But it's what you choose to do with that moment that matters." Later that evening, as they prepared for bed, Rachel found the handmade blanket the hospital staff had given them. It had become their daughter's favorite, and somehow seemed to symbolize everything their community had become: strong, supportive, and woven together with care and purpose. "I got another call from the women's shelter today," Rachel said, folding the blanket carefully. "They want us to help set up a safety awareness program for their residents." The shelter had reached out after hearing about Rachel's support groups, recognizing the value of combining practical safety skills with emotional support. David pulled her close, understanding the weight of the request. "You know what makes me proudest?" he asked softly, mindful of their sleeping daughter. "Not the arrests or the commendations, but how people have stopped seeing themselves as potential victims. They've learned they have the power to make change happen." Through their window, they could see the lights of the city, including the hospital where their story had reached its climax. But now, instead of seeing potential threats and vulnerabilities, they saw a community that had learned to watch out for each other, to speak up when things weren't right, and to stand together in the face of challenges. Their daughter's soft breathing reminded them of what truly mattered, not just protecting their own family, but helping to create a world where everyone felt safer and more empowered. The fear they'd felt that night at the gas station had transformed into a force for positive change, touching lives far beyond their small community. 1 year after the events at the gas station, the community gathered at the local park for a special celebration. What had started as a small ceremony to honor those involved in stopping the hospital drug ring had evolved into something much more meaningful: a community safety awareness festival that drew people from neighboring towns and cities. Rachel stood at the edge of the crowd, their daughter balanced on her hip, watching David demonstrate simple self-defense techniques to a group of interested onlookers. Their little girl, now walking and full of curiosity, reached out toward the colorful banners that decorated the park. "Dada," she called out, recognizing her father even from a distance. Amy appeared beside them, wearing her head nurse uniform despite being off duty. "I can't believe how much she's grown," she said, tickling the baby's chin. "She's going to be as brave as her mother." Rachel smiled, remembering how far they'd all come since that frightening night at the gas station. The festival had multiple stations set up throughout the park. At one, Robert and his police colleagues were teaching children about emergency preparedness in a fun, non-threatening way. At another, the elderly gas station attendant, now retired but still active in community safety programs, shared tips on situational awareness with business owners. "You know what's remarkable?" Amy said, watching a group of hospital staff members leading a workshop on workplace safety. "A year ago, most of us were afraid to speak up about security concerns. Now look at us, we're teaching others how to stay safe and stand up for themselves." The changes at the hospital had been dramatic. The security protocols developed in the wake of the drug ring bust had been so effective that they'd been adopted by healthcare facilities across the country. But more importantly, the culture had shifted. Every employee, from doctors to custodians, felt empowered to report concerns and contribute to safety solutions. David finished his demonstration and joined them, immediately scooping up his daughter, who squealed with delight. "You should have seen the questions they were asking," he told Rachel. "People aren't just interested in physical self-defense anymore. They want to know about community defense, how to look out for each other, how to build networks of support." The festival had drawn media attention, with several news outlets covering the remarkable transformation of a community that had turned a potentially tragic incident into a movement for positive change. Rachel had been hesitant about giving interviews, but she understood the importance of sharing their story to inspire others. "Remember that night in the hospital?" she asked David as they walked through the festival. "When I told you to go stop them, even though I was in labor? I was so scared, but I knew it was the right thing to do." She paused, watching their daughter wave at passing children. "I never imagined it would lead to all this." The "all this" she referred to was impressive. The community safety program they'd helped establish had led to a measurable decrease in crime rates. More importantly, it had created a sense of empowerment and connection among residents. People weren't just neighbors anymore, they were partners in keeping their community safe. Near the center of the park, a wall of photographs told the story of their community's transformation. There were pictures of the hospital staff implementing new security measures, the gas station's upgraded safety features, and the growing self-defense classes at the community center. But the most powerful images were of ordinary people helping each other, looking out for one another in small but significant ways. The FBI had recently released statistics showing that their community's model of cooperative security had influenced programs in other cities. The combination of professional expertise, community involvement, and individual empowerment had proven remarkably effective in preventing crime and building stronger neighborhoods. Their daughter, tired from all the excitement, nestled against David's shoulder. Rachel watched them, reminded of that moment in the hospital when she'd urged him to go stop the criminals. "You know what I've learned," she said to Amy, who was still walking with them. "True bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway." Amy nodded, thinking of her own journey from scared nurse to confident leader. "And true security isn't just about locks and cameras," she added. "It's about people watching out for each other, speaking up when something's wrong, and knowing they'll be supported when they do." The festival continued into the evening, with families gathering for a community dinner under strings of lights. The atmosphere was festive but purposeful. People weren't just celebrating what they'd accomplished, they were planning for the future, sharing ideas about how to make their community even stronger. David and Rachel found a quiet moment to sit with their daughter, who was falling asleep despite the surrounding activity. "Sometimes I think about those bikers," Rachel said softly. "Not with fear anymore, but with a kind of gratitude. If they hadn't stopped at the gas station that night, we wouldn't have uncovered the drug ring." David finished her thought. "The hospital wouldn't have improved its security. The community wouldn't have come together like this." He smiled, watching their peaceful daughter. Amazing how life works sometimes. As the sun set, Robert joined them briefly to share some news. The security program they developed was being implemented in hospitals across 3 more states. "But you know what's really impressive," he said. "It's not just about stopping crime anymore. It's about building communities where people feel safe enough to really live, to thrive." Their daughter stirred slightly, her tiny hand clutching the edge of the blanket that the hospital staff had made for her birth, the same blanket that had become a symbol of their community's unity. Rachel tucked it more securely around her, thinking about all the new mothers in her support group who were learning to feel strong and capable instead of vulnerable. "We should head home soon," David said, noticing both his girls were tired. But as they prepared to leave, they were stopped by countless community members wanting to share their own stories of transformation, how they'd found their voice, how they'd learned to stand up for themselves and others, how they discovered strength they never knew they had. Walking to their car under the evening sky, Rachel and David carried more than their sleeping daughter. They carried the knowledge that fear could be transformed into strength, that one moment of courage could spark lasting change, and that a community united was stronger than any threat it might face. 5 years had passed since that fateful night at the gas station. The old station itself had been transformed into a community safety center, with the elderly attendant's grandson now running both the business and regular safety awareness workshops. The security cameras that had once caught crucial evidence of the biker gang now served as training tools for other small businesses learning to protect their communities. Rachel stood at the podium in the hospital's newly renovated conference center, looking out at the faces of healthcare workers from across the country who had gathered for the annual Safety and Community Conference. Their daughter, now a precocious 5-year-old, sat in the front row beside David, coloring quietly but occasionally looking up at her mother with proud eyes. 5 years ago, I was just a scared pregnant woman at a gas station, Rachel began, her voice steady and strong. Today, I'm here to talk about how that moment of fear became a catalyst for change that none of us could have imagined. The room was silent, attention focused on her words. The hospital had become a national model for community-based security approaches. Amy, now the Director of Staff Safety and Wellness, had helped develop programs that balanced professional security measures with human connection and empowerment. The buddy system that had started with nervous night shift nurses had evolved into a comprehensive support network that spread far beyond the hospital walls. David watched his wife with pride as she shared their story. His self-defense classes had grown into a nationwide program, teaching not just physical techniques but the importance of community awareness and mutual support. Veterans from across the country had joined the initiative, finding new purpose in helping others feel safer and more confident. The most important lesson we learned, Rachel continued, wasn't about security systems or surveillance cameras. It was about the power of speaking up, of trusting our instincts, and of standing together when something isn't right. She gestured to the conference attendees. Each of you has similar stories. Each of you has seen moments where someone's courage to speak up prevented tragedy. Their daughter raised her hand suddenly, something she'd seen others do during presentations. The room chuckled warmly as Rachel paused to acknowledge her. Yes, sweetheart. The little girl stood up straight, her voice clear and confident. Tell them about the blanket, Mommy. Rachel smiled, reaching into her bag to pull out the now well-worn blanket that the hospital staff had made for her daughter's birth. This blanket represents everything we've learned about community, she explained, running her fingers over the soft fabric. It was made by people coming together, each contributing what they could, to create something stronger than any one person could make alone. The blanket had become a symbol of their journey. Every year, the hospital staff made similar blankets for new mothers, each one carrying a small tag that read, "You are not alone." The simple gesture had spread to other hospitals, creating a tangible reminder of community support during vulnerable moments. Robert, who had risen to become chief of police, stood up to share the latest statistics. The community safety model they developed had led to a 60% reduction in hospital-related crimes across participating facilities. More importantly, staff satisfaction and retention had improved dramatically as people felt safer and more valued in their workplaces. But the numbers only tell part of the story, he added. The real success is in the changes we see every day. People looking out for each other. Speaking up when something doesn't feel right. Taking action instead of looking away. Their daughter had started a trend of her own at her kindergarten, organizing a buddy system for recess where no child played alone. She'd explained it to her teacher with the simple wisdom of a child, "My mommy and daddy say we're stronger when we stick together." As Rachel concluded her presentation, David joined her at the podium with their daughter. The little girl reached for the microphone, something she'd clearly been waiting to do. "My mommy and daddy are heroes," she announced, "but they say everybody can be a hero if they're brave enough to help others." The room erupted in applause, but Rachel knelt down to her daughter's level. "That's right, sweetie. And do you remember what else we say about being brave?" The little girl nodded solemnly. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you're scared." After the conference, they visited the old gas station, now the Community Safety Center. The elderly attendant, though retired, still came by regularly to share his wisdom. He'd become something of a grandfather figure to their daughter, who loved hearing his stories about how one small gas station had helped change an entire community. "You know what I think about sometimes," he said, watching their daughter explore the educational displays they'd set up. "How many other communities out there just need that one spark, that one moment of courage, to start their own transformation?" The center's walls were covered with photos and news clippings chronicling their journey. The scary moments at the gas station. The night at the hospital. The first community safety festival. But more importantly, there were hundreds of photos of ordinary people who'd found their courage, spoken up, and made a difference. As evening approached, they walked to their car, their daughter skipping between them holding both their hands. The setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, much like it had that night 5 years ago. But now, instead of fear, the lengthening shadows brought a sense of peace and accomplishment. "Swing me," their daughter demanded, and they lifted her together, something they'd done countless times. Her laughter echoed across the lot, a sound of pure joy and security. This, they realized, was the true measure of their success, not just their own child's safety and happiness, but the knowledge that their actions had helped countless other families feel the same way. At home that night, as they tucked their daughter into bed, she asked for the story, her favorite bedtime tale about how her parents helped make the world a little safer. Rachel and David exchanged glances, remembering how that frightening encounter had transformed not just their lives, but an entire community. "Once upon a time," Rachel began, their daughter snuggling under the handmade blanket that had started it all, "there was a moment when being scared turned into being brave, and that bravery turned into something beautiful." Outside their window, the city lights twinkled, each one representing a home, a family, a part of the community they'd helped build. The fear from that night at the gas station had long since faded, replaced by something far more powerful, the knowledge that when people stand together, look out for each other, and find the courage to speak up, positive change isn't just possible, it's unstoppable.